Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another top 5 modern deck list, with this one with actually having some shakeups due to one key card from Dominaria United. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these monthly top 5 modern deck lists as well as short deck overviews and guides, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below. Now this little card right here, Laylight Binding, has certainly shook up the modern format. It's probably one of the most impactful shakeups, at least for the first couple of weeks of the set, since the printing of Modern Horizons 2, and it could be even comparable to things like Uro, Omnath, and Oko in terms of just the early shakeout of the format. Now, obviously, this card is not as powerful overall as those cards, and may not have the long-term effect on the format. But in terms of initial impact, this is definitely shaken up the top end of the format more than any singular card has done outside of the Modern Horizons sets, generally speaking. This is a card that is a cast away or cast out effect or Oblivion Ring-esque effect at instant speed for 6 mana that gets cheaper for each basic land type you have in play. Now, when you're playing a deck full of fetch lands and these various tri-lands, even when you're playing this monocolor 5-color deck, you're still quite often able to get down this to 2 or 1 mana. This enables you to have a very good, basically universal removal spell against anything that's not a land, and allows you to deal with problematic things from Murktides to Ragavans for fairly cheap, and gives you a nice cheap interactive spell that doesn't require, things like Dreadbore or Terminate, where you're paying 2 mana for it sometimes, and it's a sorcery speed or has other conditions like it can't, deal with a Blood Moon as just as easily as dealing with a creature or a planeswalker. This card has really shook up the format and really encouraged a lot of people to explore 4 and 5 color deck colors. Now, as far as creativity itself, this is a deck that's undergone a lot of changes over its time in Modern, and has basically settled on Archon of Cruelty as its primary thing to spin into, as this is a very overwhelming thing, forcing your opponents to edict something. You get to draw a card, they discard a card, you gain life, they lose life. It's all kinds of fun. It's a very difficult creature to cast, although you certainly can between your treasure tokens and your various Blood Crypts and Xander's Lounges. And off of your treasure tokens from Fable the Mirror Breaker, but this is primarily a card you spin into with Indomitable Creativity. The rest of it, you're a 4-color good stuff deck. You get to play Run and 6, Teferi, Lightning Bolt, Expressive Iteration. You get to play almost all the good stuff the Omnath deck does without playing the Omnath pile. Beyond that, this is a deck that has picked up in popularity even before Leyline Binding, because it had a fairly solid matchup in the 4-color control going over the top of what it did, and had a decent Murktide matchup, although, it does have the tools to deal with it, especially now with Leyline Binding. It was a deck that could kind of give both those decks fits. I may underestimate how powerful this deck is, as I think the deck is a little bit gimmicky in what it does, and a tad bit slow, but it's still a very powerful deck, and a deck definitely worthy of consideration for top 5 in the format. Deck that is, in my opinion, the real number of top 5 of the format, and that is Raktos Scam. Now, this deck is very similar to kind of a hybrid between the old Death Shadow decks, especially the like Grixis variants, except that this one gets to run Blood Moon, and kind of the Reanimator decks of old in Legacy. That is, it has these overwhelming starts with Grief or Fury, backed up by either Undying Malice, Malakir Rebirth, or Feigned Death. Allows you to get this very powerful either double Thoughtseize your opponent on turn 1, leave behind a 4-3 or 3-4 with Menace, or you're just starting out with a 4-4 double striking thing that might kill your opponent's turn 1 or turn 2 play. Beyond that, you're just kind of this Raktos mid-range deck, getting to play good stuff like Ragavan, Dothy Voidwalker, Seasoned Pyromancer, playing things like Terminate to deal with Murktides and such, as well as Lightning Bolts and things like Thoughtseize to disrupt what your opponent's doing. In addition to that, you also get to play powerful effects like Blood Moon, which in a format where people are going to 4 and 5 color land bases to be able to play this ultra flexible removal spell, really can punish those decks. Why this deck is called Scam, Obviously, it has all these busted openings, and has the Ragavan Blood Moon combination to Blood Moon your opponent on turn 2. Overall, this disrupts a lot of the things going on, but if you can get past those early couple of turns, start interacting with them, they don't always have the tools of some of the other more powerful mid-range decks like Grixis, Death Shadow, or the Jund decks of old to be able to grind. It does have the tools to go along, but it is more of a deck that's trying to get this overwhelming advantage, and it can happen to play a mid-range game every once in a while. While not quite as good as is at Murktide, it's certainly a deck that's been on the rise, and a deck you should be aware of going into most big modern tournaments. Number 4, Hammer Time. It's an aggressive deck that has a game-winning combo. Can kind of play around Blood Moon, especially the mono white variants, so it doesn't get hit by that. Doesn't care as much about something like Leyline Binding because it has so many different pieces that are problematic for the opponent. Pure Steel Paladin can be annoying, Colossus Hammer can be annoying, Esper Sentinel can be annoying, Cigar de can be a nightmare, Caldera Complete can be a nightmare. This deck really stretches your opponent's answers to have a lot of answers in the early turns, and also has this grinding game with drawing cards like Pure Steel Paladin, getting 2-for-1s with things like Stoneforge Mystic, taxing your opponent, or just get drawing cards off of things like Esper Sentinel. You also get the Urza Sagas package. You have this kind of fair mid-range plan or aggressive plan, while also having this Oops, I Kill You combo with Colossus Hammer and either Cigar de or Pure Steel Paladin. So obviously this is a resilient combo deck, aggressive deck that can pretty much survive new removal spells being printed in the format, and is a deck that is very skill dependent and probably still will continue to be one of the best decks in the format for quite some time to come, barring some huge shakeups in the format. Number 3, kind of displacing its Cascade Brethren of Living End from last list, and that is 4 or 5 color Rhinos. It's now eschewing the Temur colors to play a lot more powerful cards. It's often playing a Urion Shell to play these Leyline Bindings, and also, if you want your deck to do better in Modern, just add Elementals, add Omnath, add Fury, add Solitude. Suddenly you get a lot better in a lot of other matchups. But not only that, you get to play things like Teferi and Ardent Plea now that you're playing white. And while you do give up Blood Moon, you do have a lot more powerful deck that has a solid mid-range game plan, is even playing things like the Wandering Emperor as yet another flash start to kind of force your opponent to react to that, as well as a card that can pitch to Solitude. Overall, this is a very powerful deck. Most of the Cascade piles generally are. This is currently the one at the top of the heap because it's seeing more play because of Leyline Binding, and comes in at number 3 on our list. Number 2, and I think for the first time since I've been doing this ranking list, is that Murktide is no longer the king or queen of the modern format. Leyline Binding kind of helps with dealing with all the myriad of threats that this deck presents. Kind of gone are the days where you have to have certain answers for Ragavan, Dragon Regis, Chandler, and Ledger Shredder, and then having a different set of answers for Murktide, because oftentimes, your bolts or fatal pushes obviously can't kill a Murktide, whereas you need things like Terminate to deal with this, and doesn't trade quite very well with Ragavan or Dragon Regis Chandler. Leyline Binding kind of helps solve a lot of those problems, as well as, the 4-color control decks that used to play a lot of, like, March of Unworldly Lights and Prismatic Endings, which didn't always answer Murktide, but did answer these guys. And, while it still has the very powerful tempo shell with things like Spell Pierce, Counterspell, and Archmage's Charm, this is a deck that has finally been knocked off its perch, at least temporarily, with the advent of Leyline Binding. However, definitely a deck that's still very powerful, it can do very well in most modern events, and, can still win modern events. Not only that, gets to play Blood Moon in a format where people are trying to attack you with 4 and 5 mana color decks. Overall, this deck is still fairly well positioned, but is a little bit weaker spot, as the deck that used to be number 2 is now number 1. Finally, a deck that no one has truly ever nailed down all of the particular goings-on with this deck. It's had a couple of recent innovations that have kind of sprung up here and there. That is, the first one is Traverse the Uvenwald has become more and more common in these lists. Pairing it with things like Mishra's Bauble to be able to go get your various bullets. So you no longer have to play like 3 or 4 copies of Endurance. Suddenly 1 Endurance is good enough in a lot of matchups. You just get to play 4 of all these other ones like Solitude and Omnath and Icefang Coatl, and get to play 1-ofs of all these different things. Sometimes you'll see Furies in this list. Sometimes you'll see Emrakul the Aeon's Torn in this list, as it happens to be in, Emrakul the Promised End in this list, which gets cheaper obviously when you're playing a Delirium enabling deck. And it's just kind of your go over the top in all of these various mid-range clashes like Temur Rhinos, I guess 5-color Rhinos now, against Murktide, and that. It's a little bit worse in that kind of matchup, but very good in all these go over the top mid-range kind of battles that you'll run into. There's been a lot of other innovations. There's been some play with the new black drawing spell out of Dominaria, which is kind of escaping my mind at the moment. But people have been experimenting with that card. People obviously, experimenting with Leyline Binding in the deck. People with and without the Traverse packages. Some people still use Eldamari's Call, etc. But you're still at its heart a 4-color Omnath deck, playing Teferi, playing Renin 6, and then packing as much powerful spells around it. Now just adding Leyline Binding, where you used to have things like maybe Unholy or other copies of Lightning Bolt, Holy Heat, or March of Otherworldly Light. Still playing the Prismatic Endings. This isn't a cheap, efficient answer until you get your mana online. Overall, this deck has gained in power. Obviously, you're still seeing things like Fury and Magus in the sideboard as these nice bullets to search with Traverse the Evenwald. And overall, this is a deck that hasn't, it's been a very powerful part of the format and arguably the best deck, except for Murktide kind of kept it down a little bit, as Murktide might have had a little bit better edge against certain parts of the format that this deck struggles with. Now that the format has become more of kind of this mid-range slugfest, with even the combo decks being effectively a mid-range deck like 4 and 5 color Rhinos and Indomitable Creativity. It certainly pays to be the king of the format, and this deck is certainly the best, and probably also the most expensive deck in the format. But, a deck that we've certainly commented on time and time again being very powerful, and, adding another powerful remove spell to the deck that was already playing 4 colors. It's kind of trivial to splash that 5th color to be able to turn this on, for that much cheaper. As always, let me know down in the comments where you think the deck's rank in the format. And once again, this is as of the end of September / beginning of October of 2022. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.